Mute your phone. All right, so we're going to begin the discussion for Chapter 1 for Operations Management. To get to the slides for this course, you go to Blackboard, click on this link to the class, go to the content section, and again, this gives the class flow, how much time each thing should take. We'll go to the week that we're in, which we're in week 2, and we'll be discussing the introduction to operations management. Within this section, you have the PowerPoint slides. Every class you're expected to do a journal entry. You have your current event assignment, which I will be assigning everyone a company that they will be doing some research on. And then in the slideshow, you will have to have a slide that has a reference page, and you use this Bryan and Stratton APA guide for the reference page. And then you'll also get your quiz. You'll take your quiz through Blackboard. So there's just a placeholder here until next week. So to get into the slides, you just click on the link for the slideshow. If it doesn't automatically open, if you're using Chrome, it always brings it up at the bottom of the screen. You click on it, and we will begin. So we'll be discussing Chapter 1, Introduction to Operations Management. You can read these on your own time, all of the learning objectives. All right, so in this chapter, again, we'll be discussing operations management, what it is, and how it's used in the business environment as well as in your own life, your daily life. What operations is the part of a business organization that is responsible for producing goods or services. How can we define operations management? The management of systems or processes that create goods and or services. So some of the effects or from what operations management does is it manages everything from the start of a product being produced to the product actually reaching the customer. So some of the effects of operations management, one thing is if a business can produce a quality product and bring it to the market early, that may give that business a competitive advantage. An example of this would be, anyone ever heard of Apple? I'm sure some of you probably have. I hope all of you have heard of Apple. Well, way back in 2010, Apple introduced their tablet called the iPad. Competitors had a hard time with producing a similar quality product. One of the competitors being BlackBerry, which they tried to come out with their own version of a tablet called the Playbook. It was supposed to be on the same level as iPad, although it wasn't really. BlackBerry kept delaying the release of that tablet. So with them delaying the release of that tablet that they wanted to compete with the iPad, it kind of gave them a disadvantage. They couldn't catch up with iPad because, Nate, have you ever heard of the Playbook, or have you ever used the Playbook? Nate, are you there? Right, and that's probably the reason why, because BlackBerry couldn't produce a similar product with quality as quick as Apple could. As soon as they did bring the Playbook out, Apple brought out iPad 2, which was quicker, better, had more features. So since Apple was able to produce the iPad quicker than BlackBerry was, that gave them a competitive advantage, and also put BlackBerry at a disadvantage because they couldn't produce it, and when they did bring it out, they were so far behind that they would have had to spend more and more money to try to keep up with Apple, or at least get to the level that Apple was at But once they did that, Apple would have probably came out with another product. So if there are many companies in a country that can produce products that quickly and that efficiently, that work that good, that will give whatever country that company's in, that would give that country a competitive advantage as well. All right, so throughout this course, throughout this class, we're going to talk about goods or services. The easiest way to know what's a good and what's a service is whether or not that product or that thing is tangible, or is it physical. If it's a physical or tangible object or product, then it's considered a good. If it's something like an act or something where you're receiving some type of benefit without getting an actual product, that's considered a service. So as you can see, what goods are, you have your automobiles or your cars, your trucks, you have computers, phones, ovens, things like that. As far as services, you have, haircuts. Education is a service to a point. Air travel to a point. All right. Any questions? All right, we'll move on to the next thing. Also, throughout this class, we're going to talk about supply chain, how a product goes through certain stages from beginning until it eventually ends up in the customer's hand. So as you can see, you have different stages or different players in the supply chain. You have the suppliers that supply the suppliers, then you have your suppliers, then you have the people that produce the product, which they get the things from the suppliers. Then you need someone to distribute the product that the producers produce. And the distributor, in turn, gives it to the customer, whoever that customer is going to be. Throughout the supply chain, there are going to be things that are supposed to add value to a product. And as you can see, they have it termed the transformation process. It's also considered the value-added process. So what I'm going to do is, I did a little Excel document. I created an Excel document that will take us through inputs, transformation or conversion process, and then eventually becomes an output. All right, so I'm going to open up my little Excel example. Be able to have these both on the screen. So throughout the transformation process, there's always going to be feedback, which is a measurement taken in the transformation process, and then there will be controls. Based off of the feedback, there will be some changes made or some things that happen. So an example that I included, or that I have, is bread, the process of making bread. So stage one of the process is the farmers produce and they harvest wheat. So Josh, I'm going to ask you, as far as inputs for farmers producing and harvesting wheat, what do you think the capital, or what are some of the inputs for a farmer in producing and harvesting wheat? Mm-hmm. Anything else? Can't Baja, can you think of anything as far as inputs besides the land? I know we have labor. What about capital? Do you know what the capital would be, Baja? Okay, so capital wouldn't be money. Capital would be something like the machinery or the equipment used to produce or harvest wheat. Information would be something like something that's very important to farmers is weather. You know, if it's going to be a dry season, they would like to know that. Or if it's going to be a rainy day, they would like to know that so they know how to set their day, how to set their day up or the next day up. So stage two would be the wheat is transported to the mill. So it's going from being produced by the farmer and harvested by the farmer. So now you have to transport it. So one thing I didn't mention is we have these dollar amounts here. So step one, stage one, the value added is 20 cents. So it's costing 20 cents to produce or harvest the wheat. Step two will cost you 10 cents. So that will add a value of that'll add on to the 20 cent initially to make the value of the product 30 cent. So as far as wheat being transported, what's some of the inputs for the wheat transportation, Nate? What's some of the inputs that are needed to transport the wheat from the mill or to the mill? Mm-hmm. Yep, gasoline. They have to get trucks and they have to have people to drive the trucks. What's some information you think goes into transporting the wheat to the mill? Definitely, they need to know where they're going. So directions, definitely. So it goes through, the truck driver picks up the wheat, they transport it to the mill, they get it to the mill, which is a good that's received. So during this time, they're trying to figure out. They're also doing measurements and getting feedback. So the feedback that they might receive is, okay, or some things they might find out is, well, this mill only wants this amount of wheat. So based off of that, we're gonna only give you this amount so that you can transport it to the mill. So all throughout the process, you're getting feedback. Based off of the feedback, you're changing how you produce that product. So step three would be the mill produces the flour. So during that, Heidi, what do you think some of the inputs of stage three is for producing the flour? The mill producing the flour. What would you think an input would be for the mill? Right. What kind of information do you think they would need as far as input to to mill the to produce the flour at the mill? What kind of? Mm-hmm. Yep. 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 So based off of the feedback that the managers or the owners of that mill, based off of that feedback they get, they're going to change their controls or measurements to make it more efficient so that they can get the product out as cheap as possible but with good quality. All right, so stage three, that'll add 10 cent to to the bread, which gives you a value of product right now at 40 cent. So moving on to stage four, the flour then gets transported to a baker, and that costs 20 cent for that bread. So Parker, what would you say some inputs are for transporting the flour to the baker? What would you say inputs are? Well, we definitely would be using land. What else do you think some of the inputs would be?
Alarm off.
No, you were on the right track. Mm-hmm. 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 You need vehicles. Yep. Yep. So you definitely need capital. You need vehicles to transport the flour to the baker. The information you need to know how much the baker wants, correct? You need people to transport it, and you also need the land part, the gas or the petroleum to travel, to drive the vehicle. So that stage 4 costs 20 cent of value added, which brings the product to 60 cent. Now stage 5, the baker actually produces the bread. They take all of their inputs, and Nate, what would be some inputs that you think the baker would use to actually produce the bread? Yep, facility. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Correct. So they would need a building to put to make the bread in. They need people to make the bread. They need equipment, supplies, ingredients to make the bread, and they also, what did you say for the information? They need the recipe. Yep, the recipe. Correct. So again, even in stage 5, they're gonna take some feedback. They're gonna know, okay, this customer likes this type of bread. This customer doesn't like this type of bread. They're gonna take that information, and then they're gonna take that feedback and then use controls and measurements to change. Well, I'm not gonna waste my money on this kind of bread or this ingredient because the customers don't even want it. All right. So stage 5, that costs 80 cents. That's probably that's the biggest expense, and that brings the value of the bread to $1.40. Now stage 6, the bread has to be transported to where the customer is, which most times is at a grocery store. So Baja, what would be some inputs that would go into transporting the bread from the baker to the grocery store? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. So you definitely. Oh, sorry. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. So land is where they're taking it to. Labor, the people that are taking it to the grocery store, and the people that are in the grocery store, you know, taking the shipment. The capital is the vehicles that they use, things like that. Information is what does this grocery store want exactly? Do they want wheat bread? Do they want white bread? Do they want whole wheat? It's all these different things that they'll get feedback from, and then based off of that feedback, the grocery store will tell the baker, well, this is what we want. Send that. So that adds 20 cent to the product, which brings us to a total of 160. So now the last stage is actually the customer is getting the product. They're getting a loaf of bread. So with this, the inputs can be, you definitely have your people in the grocery store that work. You have the grocery store itself, which is the land. You have the capital, which would be the shelves that the bread is sitting on. They have the 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 machinery, a little thing that you put the bread on and the conveyor belt or whatever. And they have the register as far as capital. The information is how much is that bread going to cost? Things like that. And where should I place it in the store where the customer will see it and they would want to buy it? So placement of the product. So that adds another 25-cent value added, which gives us a grand total of $1.85 for that loaf of bread. So as you can see, the value added always, the total value added usually adds up to the value of the product. So everybody's making money out of this. You know, the farmer's making 20 cents. The mill is making 10 cents. The mill, we got the mill. The truck drivers are making money because they have to transport it. They're making 20 cents. The bakers making or charging or making 80 cents, and so on. So throughout this process, you have a 20-cent product that starts off as 20 cents, but once it gets to the end to the customer, it ends up becoming $1.85. All right, so now we'll talk about goods and services. So one thing you need to know is that there's not one thing that's 100% a good, and there's not one thing that's 100% that's a service. And I'll just review the two extremes. We'll start with the automobile assembly, steam making, steel making. So automobile assembly, it's definitely, at the end, it's going to be a good. But even though, you know, we'll say GM, where GM, they make cars, but they also ship these cars to the end user, and they use salespeople and the IT department and lawyers to sell the car because they want to make money off of it. So again, it might be 80% of a good, but there's 20% where there's some service involved with GM making money off of a vehicle that they produce. And then if we go to the other extreme where surgery or things like teaching, that's predominantly a service, but there's amount of a good involved. So for surgery, what would you think a good would be for surgery, Parker? Can you think of anything that would be tangible that comes out of a surgery? Right. So when you go to a dentist, no, you're right. If you go to a dentist, you're going there for a service. You're going to get your wisdom teeth pulled, for example. The end result of that is you're supposed to be a little healthier. Your teeth are not supposed to be hurting as much. So there's a healthier patient out of the services that are provided. So as far as teaching, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. That's correct. You're paying for a service which ends up as a tangible good. Even though it might be 80% of a service, well, there's some type of a good or physical tangible item that's coming out of going to a dentist. And that would be, if you go to a dentist, then that would be you. You would be that tangible item because you're supposed to be feeling a lot better. You're supposed to be feeling a lot healthier. So the same thing with teaching. I'm an instructor, so I'm providing you with the service. I'm trying to teach you some things about, you know, operations management. The end result of this is a more knowledgeable student. You should know a lot more about operations management by the time that, you know, from the time that you start the course, week 1 to week 16, you're supposed to be a more educated student. So does, yep. So I have a question for, I guess, Josh, you can answer this. You can answer this for me. Is Facebook, do they provide goods or services? So you're all correct. Facebook is more of a service, and the service they provide is they connect people. That's the main service. But they have different apps to allow you to connect with other people. Like they own Instagram and they have some other apps. They have that marketplace. I'm almost certain that that's an app now. And then you also have the portal device that they, the little camera thing that they have. So it's both a service and a good. It's more of a service, but it's also a good, like everybody said. So, like I said, not one item is a good and not one item is a service. It's always going to be some type of mixture of a good and a service. All right, so we'll move on to, and we kind of went over this with the bread, where you have your good up top and you have your service on bottom, a food processor. So we did the bread before. So you see you have your inputs of raw vegetables, so they're doing canned food. So you have raw vegetables, you have metal sheets, you have water, you have energy, and then you do your processing, you do your cleaning, your cooking, your cutting, packing, labeling, and the output is supposed to be the canned vegetable. For the hospital, which is a service, the inputs would be the doctors, the nurses, hospital, medical supplies. Processing would be the exams, the surgery, the therapy, and things like that. And then the output is a treated patient. So you see you have a service here, but then you have a product at the end. So again, not everything is a service and not everything is a good. So we'll skip that. We'll go to this because this is kind of what this is. So the differences between the production of goods and provisions of service. So you have output. The output for a good is tangible. Again, it's physical. The output of a service is generally intangible, where there's an act performed. Customer contact. When you're producing a good, the customer basically is kind of like non-existent physically. But when you bring it to the service end, you'll see the customer. So an example of that would be GM producing a car. There's not much customer contact that goes into GM, manufacturing a car, but there is a lot of customer contact at the end point when GM wants to sell that car. Labor content, it's very low for goods. So when you think about automation of vehicles, there's not as many laborers or people that work on the cars as it like now as it was back in the 1920s or 1930s. For service, the labor content is high because people have to be on site. So an example of that would be like a hotel. You have to have people at the front desk. You have to have people at the swimming pool. You have to have people working there, cleaning, cooking meals at the hotel. So the labor content for a service is high. Uniformity of input is very high when you're producing goods. You don't want to have 1,000 different parts like for the same vehicle. If you're producing the same type of vehicle, you want the same type of parts that go into that vehicle. For services, is not as much. You don't need a uniformity of input. You're gonna, if you need to go above and beyond, if you're working at a hotel, you need to go above and beyond to satisfy that customer, then you're gonna have to change what you're doing. So it's not gonna be uniformity of input for hotels as it is for like making a car. Measurement of productivity, that's very easy when it comes to producing a good, because you know that if you have to produce 10 cars each day, you're going to know if you're productive at the end of the day, because you're going to know, well, did I produce 10 cars or did I produce 3 cars? If I produced 3 cars, then I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I wasn't productive as possible. It's a little bit more difficult with the service because, it depends on, if you think of a doctor, how could you measure productivity of a doctor, Josh? How do you think you would measure the productivity of a doctor? Yeah, that's one way. But if you do that, then like if you see 10 patients one day and 5 patients the following day, you can't really say you're being less productive on the day that you saw 5 patients, because you don't know the severity of what the patient is coming in for. If the patient's just coming in to get their height checked, their weight checked, and just get a flu shot or something, just a regular checkup, they might be able to see 10 to 15 patients in a day if that's all they have. But if you have someone that's coming in for, surgery, or have to a follow-up meeting where the doctor has to perform different tests to to tell whether or not the surgery went well, then it might take a little bit longer. So it's kind of difficult to measure productivity when it's a service that's being provided. Opportunity to correct problems before delivery. Services, you can do that because, or not services, but goods, when you're producing a good, you can correct a problem. An example of that would be a recall on a vehicle. If there's a problem that's found out 2 years down the line, that that a vehicle could be causing people to get injured or death or whatever, Baha, what do you think the car company is going to do? Do you think they're just going to let it sit, or what are they going to do? That's correct. Yep. Yep. They have to do a recall. Yep. Yep. Correct. So, as far as trying to correct a problem before delivery for a service, it's almost, I mean, you can, if you go to a restaurant, Nate, and someone brings you out, you know, you didn't even order it. You asked for steak and they bring you out chicken. I mean, they could correct it, but how are you going to think about the restaurant that you just had that meal at? Are you think you'll have some good feelings about that restaurant? You gonna think they know? Yeah, you said definitely not. Well, if they said, well, you ordered steak, but we sent you out chicken, so be it. You get the chicken. It's not. It's, you wouldn't have it exactly. So it's a little bit difficult to correct problems because you already have that chicken in place of the steak that you ordered. So when services, the way you find out most of the time that you did something wrong is after you've already delivered the product. And I mean, you can correct it, but you can't correct it beforehand. And you might have, at that point, you might not want the problem corrected. So that restaurant may have lost a customer and, more business. For inventory, for goods, it's it's very easy to inventory goods. You can store them somewhere, and whenever you're ready for them, you can use them. As far as services, not so much, because the service is generally that at that point when the service is rendered. All right, so as mentioned before, every aspect of business affects or is affected by the operations management. So as you can see, the three basic functions of a business organization is marketing, operations, and finance. Parker, what do you think marketing refers to? Like, what function do you think they play? Correct. So advertising, finding out what the customer wants, looking at trends based off of what the trends tell you, that's going to tell you what customers want. And they also get feedback from or give feedback to the operations department so the operations department can do uh, sort of the operations department they they have the workers to work on whatever product you're trying to produce. So they produce goods. The operations manager tells the employees what shift they're going to work on, what hours they're going to work, how many people are going to be on each shift based off of what the marketing department tells them. And also, the finance department tells the operations department how much money they have available to purchase the material, to purchase the equipment, to hire people, and to do things like that. So these three functions, as you can see, they all connect together. So operations is going to talk to marketing and sales so they know what they're going to produce. And finance is going to talk to operations to tell them how much money is available for them to produce what the marketing department tells the finance department needs to be produced. So these all three of them, operations, finance, and marketing and sales, all of them overlap. So one company does not just have one department doing something. Like before I start working for the utility company, or if I tell somebody I work for the utility company, what do you think they tell me? What do you think the job they think I have? Nate, what do you think they think I do when I tell them I work for the electric company? Right, reading meters or climbing poles. I have never read a meter before, and I have never climbed a utility pole, and never want to do that stuff because it's dangerous. You know, the electric company has a department for pretty much everything they need to do to run that business effectively and efficiently. So we do have a meter reading department. We do have, I can't remember what they call the people that are on that climb the poles. I know they work in service centers, but we also have a IT department which I work in because the company needs computer systems. They have the operators who who work on the electrical grid. They use computers to regulate what comes out, what the output of the electricity. You also have people that work in plants that produce the electricity. You have community service people that actually do work in the community so that the electric company doesn't look as bad, even though it's kind of difficult not to look bad. You also have a department that works on the service vehicle. So you have mechanics that work in the utility business. You also have your lawyers because electric companies and business in general, especially big businesses, they get sued a little bit. So there's all types of departments in each company, and all those departments always overlap. But there's always operations management that has to tell people how much needs to be produced, who's going to be working here, how many people we're going to have working on which shift. All right, so does anyone plan on working in the operations, um, being an operations manager or supply chain? Anyone on this call? Nate, are you planning on doing that? Okay, Josh? Okay. Baha? Okay. Parker. All right. And Heidi. No. Okay. Well, if you do decide, here are some career opportunities or some career options. All right. We're going to skip that. Skip that. All right. This is kind of important. Now, Baha, do you own a store or work in a store? Okay, a gas station. All right. So, with supply and demand, this is always important. So, you see, you have your supply, which is usually taken care of by the operations department and supply chains, and you have your demand, sales and marketing. So, if you do supply, if you have more supply and demand, well, you're pretty much wasting money. And businesses don't like to waste money. I know with my company, I hate wasting money. So if I'm supplying more than what is being demanded, well, these two disciplines or these two areas need to start talking a little more. The sales and marketing need to tell the operations and supply chains that, hey, you're producing too much. Or if you keep producing all of this, we're all going to be out of jobs. So if the supply is less than the demand, sometimes that happens, especially with what's going on now with the pandemic, where, the supply of, you know, basic cleaning products is being demanded so much that it's kind of difficult to have enough supply. So, you might have a few upset customers, but there's nothing that can be done really, because the the companies can only produce so much toilet paper, so much bleach, so much hand sanitizer, so much uh, protective gear, that they can't always keep up with the demand as we can see now. Now, as far as the ideal situation, you want to have enough supply to take care of the demand, because there you don't have upset customers because the product is always there, and you're not wasting money because you're producing just enough products to meet the demand. All right, we'll skip that. So as mentioned before, operations management involves so many aspects of a business, from the beginning of a product to the delivery to the customer. There are a bunch of different functions that go into operations that, again, they overlap other groups and other areas. So the first thing would be forecasting. That would be how much needs to be produced. What kind of machinery are we going to use to produce? Do we need more machinery? Um, Based off of what's going on now, again, with the pandemic, with Ford, they're not producing as many cars right now. But, they couldn't forecast that this would happen, but they're starting to they're producing ventilators and things like that. So you can't forecast it all the time, but if you have the machinery and if you have the equipment there, you might be able to change up what you're doing. Another example of forecasting is Amazon. Again, with the pandemic going on, before Amazon, it was kind of difficult to get or not as easy to get a job at Amazon as it is now, because right now they're actually hiring more and more people because they're trying to keep up with the demand of products, and they need more and more people to work shifts to get products in and out. Capacity planning, not easily changed. If equipment is purchased that can only produce like 10,000 items a day, and the demand decides to become greater, like to 100,000, it's kind of difficult to meet that demand because of what's available. You only have a machine. You only have the machinery and equipment to produce 10,000, but You need 100,000. Locating facilities. Several years ago, Amazon was looking for a second headquarter, and I know they found it. I think it's in New York somewhere, but they start looking for a new facility because the business is growing. The business is getting bigger. It's growing, so they're going to need another site or more locations or another headquarters, so that you have one headquarter here, and you have another big headquarter, way across the country that can take care of that side of the country. Scheduling. Who will produce the item? What machines are needed? How many workers need to work per shift? Again, scheduling is very important. You don't want to have more people working than the work that's being demanded. So you need scheduling to figure out how to keep the best levels of employees on each shift, and what machines are needed for each shift. Managing inventories. Incoming materials may need to be stored before an item can be produced. So it needs to be stored somewhere, and you have to find out where it's stored and how much of a level of the inventory you're going to have, and when is it going to be time to purchase more of the inventory. You need to know that type of information. Assuring quality control, very important for goods, because if you have a faulty, bad, unsafe product, that could either put you out of business and get you sued, or get you sued and make you lose a lot of money. And you always want to keep your employees happy, because the more your employees enjoy working for you, the easier it is to get them to do work. So the role of the operations manager. The operations function consists of all activities directly related to producing goods or services. So I said that before. And the primary function of the operations manager is to guide the system by decision making. So you have two different ways to make decisions. The first being the system design decision. So what type of capacity? Where are the facilities located? How many facilities? How's the facility laid out? This usually requires long-term commitment of resources. So you can't just decide, okay, today we're only going to have this many facilities or this many locations. We're going to lay the factory out or the facility out this way today, but tomorrow we're going to change it. This requires long-term commitment of resources. So you just can't make a decision and then decide the next day that everything's going to change, because it's so many resources involved in that, where it'll take a little bit of time to make some changes. System operations decision, management of personnel, inventory management, scheduling, those things are included in there. So operations managers generally spend more time on these decisions than any other decision area, where operations managers are going to start thinking about how much inventory, how's the scheduling, who's working where, what building are they working on, what hours are they working, things like that. And I kind of just said this. This was discussed. Okay, so modeling is a key tool used by all decision makers. The model is an abstraction of reality. It simplifies things to make it easier to make decisions. So you have three different types of models. Physical model would be like a prototype. Company may decide to release new products, but they want to get a feel for how the customer is going to take the product. So they might just come out with something, they'll come out with a product just to get a feel for it. Like McDonald's did the Shamrock Shake one year, but they started off doing it, just to see how it would play. But now they do it like every year. It's a special. Like before, I don't think it was only on St. Patrick's Day or around that time. I think they had it throughout the year, but they found out, hey, we might want to only just have it when it's time for St. Patrick's Day, when people want green stuff. Schematic model, okay, is a drawing. It gives you, if you have like model pieces. An example would be, well, you see a drawing of a city where you have the city, a map of a city, and you want to put different things in different places. That's what schematic modeling is. Mathematical model is used more so for forecasting. So benefits of using models, uh, they make things easier to do. It's easy to use, less expensive because it's not the full product. It's just giving you an idea, so it can make change. You can make changes to models a lot cheaper than making changes to a product once it's been distributed out to everywhere. Two, it requires users to organize and sometimes quantify information. So this is used to gain insight. It makes understanding products easier. Three, when there's a model, business may be able to understand a customer's problem better. So it increases their understanding of a problem. Do we have any gamers on here? Nate, do you game? Josh? A little bit. What game you play, Josh? Okay. Parker, you game? What do you play? Mm-hmm. And Baja, what about you? Okay. And Heidi, are you there? Is she not on? Oh, she's not there. Okay. We must have lost her. What games do you play, Nate? What's one of your favorite games? Okay. Yeah, so with video games, when they want to release a game, they'll they'll put out like beta versions to see how it's gonna, if there are any bugs that they can fix right away before releasing it. Has anyone ever like played a beta game or a beta version of a game? Yeah, it might be a little bit. Tell me about the beta game compared to what would be a final product. Tell me some things about the game. Yeah. Yeah, so again, they're going to send out a beta version to kind of see what kind of problems are out there. And based off of those problems, can we fix this before we want to send a final product out? Is it easily fixed? All right, number four, enable managers to analyze what if questions. So they try to correct problems before customers have them. So they might sit in a room and look at a product and say, what kind of problems can a child get into if they use this product, or what kind of problems could happen? So they try to present things based off of what if questions. All right, so some limitations of models. Um, Quantitative information may be emphasized well over qualitative, so quantity over quality. Math models depend a lot on data. The quality of that data is very important. If you get junk data, what kind of results do you think you're going to get, Nate? If you're getting a bunch of data, but it's a bunch of junk data, do you think that data is going to be good or bad? Exactly. So models can be incorrectly applied and the results misrepresented. So people using the model, they may not be trained well enough to understand the model. So they may see some things and say, well, there's problems here. So if we go back to the doctor example where a doctor, Doctor A may be seeing like 50 clients in a month, Doctor B may only be seeing 20 clients a month. Well, if they see this doctor seeing 50 clients in a month, they might say, "Oh, this one's doing a lot more work and might be more productive than Doctor B who's only doing 20." Well, if you don't have like all of the information and if you're only just looking at those numbers, then you can probably be getting rid of or saying the one that's doing better work, you might be viewing them as being like inefficient or ineffective and decide to let them go or whatever. Well, you may have just made a big mistake based off of applying what you get from results from models based off of that. All right, so we'll move on. All right, quantitative approaches. So there are 5 different quantitative approaches or things that we can discuss about that. First thing being linear programming. Every business has to deal with scarce resources or limited raw materials. Sometimes you can use linear programming or the mathematical tools to help optimize the use of resources. So if you know certain information, you might be able to use that information to efficiently or produce a product more efficiently because you only have what you have. Queuing technologies. An example of this would be something like a grocery store. So when you go to a store, you find the product that you want. After you're done shopping, Baha, what happens? What does the customer do? Like after you're done finding all of the products that you want, all the items that you want, what do you do? Do you just leave the store? Mm-hmm. And then after you confirm that that's what you want, then what do you do? Right, and you have to stand in a line most of the time. Most of the time, you just can't go. You have to wait in line. So queuing technology might help speed up the line, or it might help speed up. Once you get to the line, it might speed up you being able to pay a lot quicker. Right. All right. Inventory models. These are very important. A very important part of business. Again, if you know what your inventory needs to be, that kind of gives you an idea of what needs to be there, how long it needs to be there, what levels that you need to get more stuff. It helps you, it minimizes the amount of money that you have to waste or spend. Project models, that's used in project management, and then statistical models. Again, you use the statistics to help you make decisions. Where's this? All right, so we have a historical summary of operations management. All right, in the 19 or the 1700s, the 1770s, that's when the Industrial Revolution came out. Before that time, the workers did everything manually. Then they delivered it to the customer. So then you move into the 1911 up until 1915, where you have your mass production, Ford assembly lines, which makes it a lot quicker to produce a car, where you go right down the line. You have people doing different jobs, putting different parts on the car, making it much quicker to produce a car instead of having one person doing everything, putting all the parts together, just having one person. You also have interchangeable parts between 1911 until 1920, where, again, this goes with the assembly line, interchangeable parts, division of labor, where having parts that can be used on different vehicles or different places, it makes it easier to do the job. Having different people doing different jobs instead of having one person doing all the jobs makes it super quick, a lot quicker to mass produce vehicles. When you do talking about interchangeable parts, you didn't really need a custom part to produce cars. You had parts that could be used on different cars. It made it simple, made it easy. So you move into 1960 to 1920. That area was called the human relations time period. At this point, they found that people doing the same job day in, day out. Josh, if you did the same job day in, day out, how motivated would you be to keep going to work? You're doing the same job. Not very motivated. So when you have not so motivated employees, Parker, what do you think of the quality of the products that are being produced? It goes down. Exactly. So this is where they started doing research on human relations, where they're seeing people doing the same job over and over, but they're noticing that the products, the quality isn't as good as it used to be. Well, they started to figure out, well, if you want better produced products, why not motivate your employees to produce better products? So that was the 1920, 1960 time frame. The 1960s and 1970s, that was decision models. And then you have 1980 and 1990s. That was more of Japan influencing the production of products using just in time, which we'll talk later on in the semester, or lean manufacturing. And then you have the 1990s until now, where you have the internet. Before the internet, things were a little bit slower as far as getting products sold to people across the world. Well, now with the internet, everybody's connected. So, I can purchase something from Russia, from China, from India, and get it, a lot quicker. It may take a month because it has to, be shipped from a different continent or a different country, but it's a lot quicker because that company over in the foreign country, they already know what product I want. They know what color. They know things like that. They don't have to wait for me to put something in the mail and mail it off to them, because I'm able to tell them right away, I want this color, I want it at this price, this size. I can get it a lot quicker. So that's the historical summary of operations management, which you will probably need to know next week. All right, so operations today, technology management. Like I said before, the internet is making global competition, like it's thriving. Like the competition around the globe is thriving, because you don't have to worry, you don't have to wait for someone, your customer, to tell you what they want and how they want it. You can find out right away, and then you can get the product or produce the product, and you can send it to the customer. All right, we'll talk about sustainability later. All right, some ethical issues and operations. This first one, financial statements, very, very, very big thing. Anyone ever heard of Enron? Was anyone paying attention to the news when Enron was pretty big? Yeah, actually. Yeah, I actually lived through it. So Enron decided to falsify all of their financial records, or the majority of them. So they made themselves look like a bigger company than they really were, which is not a good thing because like a lot of the employees, they put all of their retirement savings into Enron shares because those shares were trading at a higher price. So their retirement accounts were looking good, and it was based off of all false documents. So once the false all that false information came to light, well, a lot of people lost all of their life savings or their retirement savings, and it just caused a big problem for the state of Texas where Enron was located at, because you have a lot of people working at Enron, getting paid, paying taxes based off of the income at Enron, also putting money into different, their retirement accounts. So once Enron got found out, it was not a good thing. It was a lot of legislation from the government that came out of them falsifying all of their documents. Worker safety, very important, because if you have injured employees or if someone gets injured on the job site, well, the employer is kind of responsible for making sure that that person gets taken care of, as far as like making sure they get some type of compensation for being injured. Like for me, I have to pay workers' comp, and there's only a few people that work for my business. But I would prefer to pay that so that if push comes to shove, if anybody gets injured, well, we have this little workers' comp benefit here for you to at least make some type of money while you're healing. Product safety, recalls. You don't want to have, a company does not want, well, they shouldn't want to be producing products that aren't safe, because if your product causes death or anything like that, with the exception of cigarettes, alcohol, but companies like, what was it, Volkswagen, I think a couple years ago, I think it was Volkswagen, where I think either the car would accelerate unexpectedly, causing like accidents, things like that. That's not a good look. So they had to recall a bunch of vehicles. Quality, self-explanatory. The environment, we need to take care of the environment. Without having an environment, you don't have people living. So it's definitely very important. Community, you want to take care of the community, because the people that work for the companies live in communities. So the better that community's doing, the better that employee might feel about that company. Again, hiring and firing, there are labor laws that you have to follow when you hire people as well as when you fire people. All right. All right, since there are no questions, we're going to go over how to get to the current event assignment for week 2. So again, you go to the class, you go to the content folder, you scroll down to the week, and you have your current event assignment. All right, so once you click on it, you'll get a PDF that opens. Now, please title your current event correctly. I'm going to tell you right now how to title it. Do you need time to get something to write with? All right, so when titling your current event, you want to put your last name. So for me, it would be Mullis. And then it would be week 2, current event assignment. That's how you need to title it. So based off of the week, you always have your last name first, and then the week number, current event assignment. Please do that, or I will take points off. All right, so you have your instructions. It has a little intro right here. And this assignment will have at least 7 slides. So each slide, you have to include certain information. So slide 2 has a brief description of the business. Slide 3, operations. Slide 4, list of 5 ways that quality is measured. Slide 5, how and why are these factors important? And then you'll go and discuss each one, A, B, C, D, E. Slide 6 lists at least 3 ways technology is used. And slide 7, which a lot of people get points taken off for, make sure you cite your references properly. If you're going to cite what's in the slideshow, make sure you write down the title of the slide as well as the slide number. Don't say Mr. Mullis's presentation or Mr. Mullis's lecture. Make sure you have the slide number, or I will take points off. So again, slide 1, you won't write down title page. You'll just put this information into slide 1. Slide 2, the heading should be this. Slide 3, the heading should be operations. Slide 4, the heading should be list 5 ways the quality is measured by their customers. Slide 5, how and why are these factors important to the successful operation of business? That would be the heading. Slide 6, the heading would be list at least 3 ways technology is used to give them an advantage. And then slide 7, you may want to put a heading of reference page, but make sure you put the correct, you use the Brandon Stratton APA guide to do the correct citations. Nate, the company you're going to research is Disney. Josh, you're going to research Walmart. Parker, you're going to research Amazon. Baha, you're going to research Pepsi. And Heidi has to research Nike. All right, so the things that are going to be on the quiz, the key terms that will be on there. Is everyone ready to write this down? All right, here's a list. E-business, e-commerce, goods, interchangeable parts, operation management, Pareto phenomenon, services, Six Sigma, supply chain, and value added. Moving on to the questions that you will be expected to answer. You'll be expected to answer number 5, number 6, and number 9.